Woody is back. That's the shock. That's the headline. And that's the problem. Because if you watch Toy Story 4, you know Woody's story ended. He left Bonnie, he left Buzz, he left the gang, and he chose to live a new life with Little Bo Peep. That was the closure. That was the goodbye. And yet, here we are, staring at the Toy Story 5 teaser trailer, and Woody is front and center again. It feels less like a creative decision and more like a corporate one. The return of Woody is Pixar's own, somehow, Palpatine returned moment. The teaser itself is short, just 50 seconds, released on Pixar's official channel. We see the toys reacting to Bonnie's new tablet, a modern-day device that immediately unsettles them. There's even a new character introduced, Lilypad, who chirps, "Hi there, I'm Lilypad, let's play." But the real headline isn't the tablet, or Lilypad, or even the June 19, 2026 release date. It's Woody. Tom Hanks is back, voicing the cowboy who supposedly walked off into the sunset. And that's where the cracks begin to show. Toy Story 4 made over $1 billion worldwide, proving that audiences will show up even for a sequel that didn't need to exist. But narratively, Toy Story 4 was clear. Bonnie neglected Woody, barely noticed him, and ultimately didn't even realize he was gone. The film's emotional weight came from Woody choosing to leave. That was the closure. That was the risk Pixar took, and now, Toy Story 5 erases it. This is where the Rise of Skywalker comparison becomes unavoidable. In Star Wars, Palpatine's return wasn't foreshadowed, wasn't earned, and wasn't explained. It was a patch job. Snoke was gone, the trilogy needed a villain, so Palpatine was shoved back in. Somehow, Palpatine returned became the meme, the shorthand for corporate storytelling. And now, Woody's return risks becoming Pixar's version of that. Somehow, Woody returned. The teaser doesn't explain it, it doesn't hint at how or why, it just shows him back with the toys, facing a new challenge. And that silence speaks volumes. Because if Pixar had a clever, earned explanation, they'd tease it. Instead, they're banking on nostalgia. Woody and Buzz together again. That's the pitch. That's the product. The Hollywood Reporter article makes it clear. Disney CEO Bob Iger announced Toy Story 5 in 2023, right after Lightyear underperformed. Pixar's original films, Soul, Luca, Turning Red, Elemental, Elio, haven't had the same cultural impact. Inside Out 2 was a hit, but that's a sequel. Sequels are safer. Sequels sell. And Woody and Buzz are the ultimate merchandising duo. So Woody comes back. But this isn't just about one character, it's about Pixar itself. Once upon a time, Pixar was the studio that could do no wrong. Every film was an event. Every film was a cultural touchstone. And this is where Toy Story 3 becomes so important to the conversation. That film wasn't just another sequel, it was closure. The reason Andy was aged up was deliberate. The audience that grew up with Toy Story and Toy Story 2 had grown up themselves. They were nearing adulthood or already adults. And Toy Story 3 reflected that. I remember going to see Toy Story 3 on opening day, and the theater was sold out. The overwhelming majority of the audience were adults, with only a handful of kids scattered throughout. That wasn't an accident. Pixar knew exactly who they were speaking to. Toy Story 3 wrapped up the story narratively and emotionally in a way that resonated with the generation that had carried these films with them since childhood. Andy's goodbye was our goodbye. It was bittersweet, but it was complete. And then Toy Story 4 arrived, and all it really did was validate why Woody would have been better off staying with Andy. Remember, Woody wasn't just another toy. He was the family heirloom, passed down from Andy's grandfather to Andy's father, then to Andy himself. That lineage mattered. It gave Woody weight, history, and meaning, and yet Andy gave him up at the end of Toy Story 3, trusting Bonnie to take care for him. But what did Bonnie do? She shoved him in the closet, neglected him, and barely noticed his absence. That sting felt personal to the people who grew up with Toy Story 1, 2, and 3. Imagine watching Toy Story 4 just to see Woody completely sidelined, treated as expendable, when for us he was never expendable. That's why Toy Story 4 hurt. It wasn't just Woody being neglected. It was the audience's own childhood being neglected. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Audiences still showed up. Toy Story 4 made over $1 billion in 2019. And once that happened, you can't blame Disney for wanting to make Toy Story 5. If a sequel that undermined closure could still break the $1 billion mark, then the message was clear. Nostalgia sells, even when it hurts. The audience validated the decision. We proved that closure doesn't matter if the brand is strong enough. And now, Pixar is simply following the money. And this isn't just a Pixar problem, it's an audience problem. Look at Gladiator II. Online, people were saying, why does this movie even exist? Gladiator didn't need a sequel. And yet, when it opened, it pulled in $55 million in its first weekend. If you're gonna say a sequel is unnecessary, then don't go see it. But audiences did, and that's why it exists. Or take Transformers: Age of Extinction. Michael Bay himself even told the naysayers something along the lines of, shut the fuck up, you're gonna go see the movie anyway. And he was right. The film made over $1 billion at the box office in 2014. People complained, but they still bought tickets. The same thing happened with Disney's live-action remake of The Lion King. Everyone said it was unnecessary, a hollow retreat of the 1994 classic. And yet, in 2019, it made more money than the original ever did. Nostalgia won. And then there's Jurassic World. The 2015 reboot made more than Jurassic Park did in 1993. And even though its sequels are now ranked among the worst follow-ups of all time, including Jurassic World itself, every single one of them made money. That's the pattern. Audiences complain online, but they still show up in theaters. So when we talk about unnecessary sequels, we have to admit that the blame doesn't just fall on the studios. It falls on us. We reward the behavior. We validate the decisions. We prove time and time again that closure doesn't matter if nostalgia is strong enough. And Pixar has learned that lesson. That's why Woody is back. Not because the story demanded it, but because the audience proved that demand doesn't matter. But the decline of Pixar isn't just about box office numbers or Disney Plus releases. It goes deeper. It goes back to John Lasseter being fired. Whether people want to admit it or not, Lasseter was the heart of Pixar. He was the creative center, the guiding force, the one who made sure every film had soul. Once you remove the heart, the body stumbles. Soul, Luca, and Turning Red didn't underperform because they went straight to streaming. They underperformed because Pixar without Lasseter is Pixar without its heartbeat. It's the same thing that happened to Marvel after Stan Lee retired in 2008, and even more so after his death. Once Stan Lee was gone, Marvel movies lost that connective tissue, that spark of joy that came from his cameos and his presence. The brand survives, but the soul is gone. Pixar is living through that same hollowing out. Woody's return in Toy Story 5 isn't just about nostalgia, it's about a studio trying to recapture something it lost when Lasseter left and proving that it can't. And what does it say about Pixar themselves if they can never move on from Toy Story? That was the movie that put them on the map, the first fully CG animated feature in film history. Before Toy Story, Pixar was a studio of short films, experimenting with early CG. My personal favorite was The Old Man Who Plays Chess Against Himself. That was called Jerry's Game. That short was proof of Pixar's artistry, their ability to tell a complete story in just a few minutes. People forget that there was a time when Pixar meant more than just Toy Story. They gave us Monsters, Inc., The Incredibles, Finding Nemo, Up, WALL-E, Brave, Inside Out, Coco, Cars, and A Bug's Life, which I still think is one of Pixar's most underrated films, maybe because it played endlessly on the Disney Channel in the 2000s. That was the era when Pixar meant variety, when every new release felt like a different world, a different experiment, a different emotional journey. You could go from the underwater wonder of Finding Nemo to the superhero satire of The Incredibles, then to the dystopian sounds of WALL-E. Each film had its own identity, its own risks, and its own cultural footprint. Sure, Pixar had its missteps. The Good Dinosaur stumbled, Cars 2 felt like a cash grab, but those were the exceptions, not the rule. The rule was innovation. The rule was artistry. The rule was emotional storytelling that transcended age. Pixar wasn't just making kids' movies. They were making films that adults carried with them. Films that became part of the cultural conversation. And that's why it's so telling that Pixar can't seem to move past Toy Story. Because if the studio that once defined originality now leans almost exclusively on its oldest franchise, it suggests a creative ceiling has been reached. Toy Story was the film that proved computer animation could carry an entire feature. But if Pixar can't move beyond that achievement, then the studio risks becoming a caretaker of its own past rather than an innovator of its future. So maybe the real question isn't why's Woody back, but what happens to a studio when its greatest achievement becomes its only safe bet? That's the crossroads Pixar now faces. Either Toy Story 5 proves there's still creative life left in this franchise, or it becomes the moment when audiences finally recognize that Pixar has stopped moving forward. Because if Pixar can't innovate, then the entire animation industry feels the ripple effect. Pixar was once the studio that set the bar. Every release was a benchmark for storytelling, for technical achievement, for emotional resonance. Other studios chase Pixar's standard. DreamWorks, Illumination, even Disney Animation itself often follow the trail Pixar blazed. But if Pixar is no longer leading, then the bar drops for everyone. Sequels become the default, risk becomes the exception, and originality becomes harder to justify in a marketplace that rewards familiarity. That's the danger of Toy Story 5. Not that it exists, but that it signals a shift in priorities. It tells us that Pixar is more comfortable mining its past than defining its future. And when the studio that once gave us WALL-E and Up decides that Woody and Buzz are the safest bet, it says something about the state of creativity in Hollywood. Audiences will still show up, that much is certain. Nostalgia is powerful and Toy Story is beloved, but the real test is in box office. The real test is whether Pixar can still surprise us, still challenge us, still make us feel something new. Because if Toy Story 5 is just another exercise in brand maintenance, then Pixar risks becoming a museum of its own legacy, curating the past instead of creating the future. And that's the irony. The studio that once proved computer animation could change cinema now faces the possibility of being defined by one franchise. If Toy Story 5 is the best Pixar can offer, then the question isn't whether Woody belongs back with the toys. It's whether Pixar belongs back at the forefront of innovation.